There are many in the Black community that hate this term persons of color or people of color, you know, and this is something that they want to paint anybody that got some melanin in their skin with this one POC label, but it really is something that should not be used at all. So what you're saying is you're going to define the group white with one group, but everybody else, we're all lumped together as person of color. There are many that don't like that at all. You know, I'm going to play this audio from NPR.
POC. I've personally been using the term people of color since the mid-90s. I was not, but Shireen, we use it all the time on the pod, yes, all the time. POC women. POC media. People of color. People of color. For the POC pie win. Women POCs. People of color feel in a white supremacist society. Being a Republican and a POC. People of color, right. A world tour of the POC experience. But after the protests for Black Lives reignited this past spring, I saw a lot of people online saying they were over it. On Twitter and people's IG stories, people were saying, "Stop calling me POC." Black folks in particular, I saw a lot of people saying, "Just please call me black. Blackity black black. Do not call me a person of color." And all this woke me up to the fact that people of color is this term that I use. It's a term that we say, like you said, a lot. But it's a phrase that I haven't really given that much thought to. But that's changed. So on this week's episode, what do we mean when we say people of color? Okay. Why do some of us identify with that term, and why does it annoy so many others? Is it time to say RIP to POC? And if so, is BIPOC the new kid on the block? I think you should have said, is BIPOC the new kid on the block? Just because, rhyme ass reasons, bars. However the hell you're supposed to say it, we're going to get into all that too. Oh, and just in case you're new here, I'm Shireen Marisol Meraji. I'm Gene Demby, and this is Code Switch from NPR. Just can't move without you. Support for this podcast and the following message come from Marguerite Casey Foundation, creating greater freedom for change makers to create a truly representative.
Okay, we're going to skip over that part. But for the most part, a lot of, especially people in the Black community, do not like that people of color. And I know you have heard that a lot among the people online. So, I don't care for it either. I think it kind of missed the mark, and it's now blending everybody together as one when we are definitely not one.
Oh, well. If someone says there's something better, then I'll probably use that. All right, Shireen. So when you hear people of color, what does that phrase mean to you? I'm curious. Are you trying to put me on the spot? Look, if you would have asked me this question a couple of months ago before I embarked on this journey, I probably would have said the OG POCs are Black people, Native Americans, and Latinos, particularly those of Mexican origin, because one could argue that these three groups have the longest history of being racialized here in the United States. Oh, wow. Okay. So obviously, you leave some folks out? No. Okay. Hear me out. Like I was saying, I would have said those are the OG groups. But now when we say POC, we include Asians of all backgrounds, Pacific Islanders, Arab, Middle Eastern, and North African people, especially those who are Muslim. Why that combination of people? I'm curious. They've all been denied membership to the whites-only club. They have been othered, made to feel perpetually foreign, not American, because, and we've talked about this, being American is so often used as shorthand for white and Christian. All right, y'all, low-key, language is a little bit of an obsession for us on Code Switch. Code switching, obviously, is a term from sociolinguistics. As you probably know, we have a series at Code Switch called Word Watch, where we take words and we take phrases in the popular discourse with an underexplored and sometimes really fraught racial history to them. Yep. You know, outside agitator, Hispandering, that was one of Shireen's, gung ho, guru. And when we're doing the research for these word watches, the first call we make, not always, but one of the first calls we make is usually to a linguist because, you know, words. My name is John McWhorter. I teach linguistics at Columbia University. I am familiar with that voice. John McWhorter is known for a lot of things, but relevant to our interest, he hosts the Slate podcast, Lexicon Valley. This is true. And John identifies as Black, and he told me he rarely, if ever, calls himself a person of color, but here's his breakdown of the term POC. Formally, in terms of the linguistic meaning, somebody who is of a color in terms of melanin, if we think of white people as embodying the absence of color, if we must. So the idea is to have a term for people who aren't white. Now, that's the linguist in me. I think the sociologist in me, despite that I have no training in the subject, but the human being walking around in me says that when we talk of people of color, we also mean people who are socially subordinate to whites as well. That's usually the reason that one is using the term. All the dictionary definitions for people of color that I found basically say a person who is not white. But if, like John says, there's another unifier, and that's the social subordination of certain groups, then he says people of color are Black, Latino, Native American, and Asian. And he adds, and again, John is not a sociologist, but he adds that some groups of Asians endure more discrimination than others, so those groups are probably the best fit. As you can see, the answer is sloppy because the term has been around for a while. Race doesn't make any sense. And because it's so difficult to work out which subjugated groups belong under the people of color umbrella and which don't, John prefers to use non-white. When I write, that's how I do it. If I'm trying to say this is how you might feel if you are not one of the white people among us, then I just say non-white and loop everybody under there, because then there is no even suggestion that I'm saying that all of these people are alike in some way. I'm just saying you're not white. And so if anybody is quote unquote all alike, it's the whites, and then there are all these other people. Gene, what do you think of non-white? I hate it, Shereen. I hate it. Oh, so suppose you and me and Leah and Kumari are at some weird speakeasy place in Los Angeles. We're all in a room. We're kicking it. You know what I mean? We're four non-whites, really. That's what we're doing. Ew. A quartet of minorities. How about that? I hate it. I hate it. Even minority, like, it doesn't make sense for what we're talking about. Like, in what context are we the numerical minorities? If it's just the four of us in the room, we ain't the minority. True. Not globally, True. Right? And certainly not even, like, if you were in DC, brown people are not in the minority. Yeah. If we're in LA, brown people are certainly not in the minority. So, like, what? It doesn't even make sense to talk about ourselves in relation to each other, in relation to whiteness, when nobody in the space we're talking about is white, and we make up the majority of people in the space. You know what I mean? I do know what you mean. And to echo John's point, this is all sloppy and messy because race doesn't make any sense. And there doesn't seem to be a clear line delineating who is or isn't a POC. I spoke with two people who wrote an article addressing a question they hear all the time, Jean. Oyan Poon, co-author of Are Asian Americans White or People of Color? And Naseeb Bengal, Are Asian Americans White or People of Color co-author? Oyan is like a play cousin of ours. I'm very curious about what Oyan and Naseeb argued in this piece. Well, we answer a flip side of the coin question, which is, are Asian Americans white, very quickly, and we say absolutely not. Right? That's Oyan again. And in the article, Oyan, who calls herself a second-generation Hong Konger American, and Naseeb, who calls herself a second-generation queer Punjabi American, they both point to anti-Asian racism throughout American histories. specifically laws that banned immigration and citizenship for people from Asia between 1882 and 1965. We've dived? Digged? We've plumbed. We've dug in. Dug in. We have dug into the Chinese Exclusion Act more than a few times on Code Switch. We talked about how you can't really understand more recent discrimination against Asian American people. The surge of hate crimes against Asian Americans during the COVID pandemic, the president calling the virus Kung flu. All of those things are sort of based on this codified anti-Asian sentiment in American history. So obviously, Asian Americans do not occupy the same space in the social hierarchy as white people. Mm-hmm. So, ergo, people of color? Well, that is the question. And Oyan says that's a much more complicated answer than whether or not Asian Americans are not white, because
it really depends on how you define and conceptualize what it means to be people of color. The history of the term is very much in similar ways to the term Asian American comes out of political struggle and resistance to white supremacy.
Nassib says that's the same for women of color. There's a history of political struggle that you have to understand. Okay. And she takes me back to 1977, which was a really good year, and I'm not going to tell you why. But we're back to 1977 in Houston, Texas. Thousands of women are gathered to create a document that's going to spotlight gender issues that are being ignored.
Women of color term in the U.S., came out of the 1977 International Women's Years Conference, initiated by President Jimmy Carter's administration. And so without knowing that particular history, removed 30, 40 years later, it just seems like a popular buzzword.
Nassib says that at that conference in Houston, Texas, only a couple of pages of the couple hundred-page document that was going to make its way back to President Carter's desk focused on issues specific to women who weren't white. So, Black women got together, as they're wont to do. Yep. We've talked about this on the show. Black women got together and pushed to change that. And the other quote-unquote minority women, as they would have been called back then, they wanted their issues addressed too. So they all created a coalition to help make that happen. Here's Oyan again.
If we're going to be brought together, there has to be a reason, not just like...
All right, I'm not going to go on. This is my opinion, y'all. I think you can't really put our plight among anybody else that has melanin in their skin and in other groups. Yeah, I mean, do I think other groups have been discriminated against? Yes, but that doesn't mean I want to be lumped in with them. I don't like being identified as a person of color. I don't like it. It is it's just like slapping a label on every group and feel, well, I don't have to identify you as a group anymore. You're all just people of color. So, it's almost like your identity gets lost under this label. I don't like that, and the only time I will use people of color if it's in an article that I'm reading. But as far as me referring to myself as that, I don't. Plain and simple, I just don't. But y'all, please tell me what you think. I really think they should do away with this altogether. If I had it my way, that's what I would do. I wouldn't want to see it anywhere. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.